I've played every game in the Resident Evil series, a few I count amongst my favourite games of all time, and some amongst the worst games I've ever played. The following is my definitive ranking of every game in the Resident Evil series. This list excludes Umbrella Corps and Resistance, as these are primarily multiplayer games. In 25th place, Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City, a tawdry trudge through familiar ground with very little substance. Operation Raccoon City is a pointless action game set in Raccoon City sometime around the events of Resident Evils 2 and 3. Its story is an alternate scenario, non-canon, so adds nothing to the bigger Resident Evil plotline. This wouldn't be a problem if it wasn't for the fact that the game is extremely boring. The story it does have isn't interesting, and the gameplay is a plodding, linear run and gun through various environments. There's not much that redeems it really, and I'd largely recommend avoiding this game. It's not entirely awful, but there are so many better third-person shooters that you could just play instead. In 24th place, Resident Evil 6. Somehow it offers incredible fan service while simultaneously spitting in the face of everything Resident Evil is. Resident Evil 6 is set sometime after the events of Resident Evil 5 and features different scenarios, each following a set of different characters. Some are new, and some are beloved characters from the franchise. It's exciting when you start the game and get this impossible choice of which scenario to start with. Well, that's where the excitement stops. Resident Evil 6 is by far the worst game in the mainline series for a variety of reasons. The gameplay has very much shifted away from survival horror to an action game. Sure, it's got zombies and monsters, but you can barely even call it a horror game anymore. The action isn't even very good either. The enemy AI is pretty dumb, and they introduced a cover feature which doesn't even work half the time. Overall, it's not a great action game, but that's not why I hate it. Resident Evil was always a horror franchise, survival horror first and foremost, and while newer games have tended to deviate from that a little, this goes so far that it doesn't remotely feel like Resident Evil anymore. I honestly thought this was the end of the franchise for me, as it made me lose any faith that they could make another good Resident Evil game. Thankfully, I was wrong. In 23rd place, Resident Evil Gaiden. A good story, but simple gameplay and very little replay value. Gaiden was the first Resident Evil game that was made specifically for handhelds, and it shows. It presents survival horror the best way it can given the limitations of the Game Boy, but the game just isn't scary. It's fun though. You explore a passenger ship that's been overtaken by a zombie outbreak. It plays similarly to previous games in the series, except that it's a top-down view for exploration and first-person for shooting sections. The story is actually really good, with plenty of twists and turns, despite being non-canon. I can't recommend buying this game because the price of it these days is insane, but if you get the chance, it's worth playing once. It doesn't have much to replay it for, but the story is worth experiencing. In 22nd place, Resident Evil Dead Aim. An unoriginal premise and corny dialogue stunt an otherwise okay game. Dead Aim combines the exploration of a normal Resident Evil game with first-person light gun action. It's playable with a PS2 light gun or a mouse. It's a nice mix-up to the gameplay, so it's a shame that it's wrapped up in a poor story with lame dialogue. Alongside the tweaked gameplay, it plays very similarly to any of the previous Resident Evil games, so it doesn't mess with the formula too much. It's an okay game, but like many games on the list, it's probably only worth playing once, if at all. In 21st place, Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica. A straightforward retelling of Code Veronica in the most boring way possible. I'm only ranking this higher than Dead Aim because it's based on Code Veronica, which is a game I like. But the simple fact is, this isn't a great game. It's okay for a light gun game, but generally speaking, it's pretty linear. You basically work your way through each level shooting monsters. You have to find a key to escape the level, then face a boss at the end. It continues like this as you work your way through the story of Code Veronica, with the caveat that if your time runs out, then Nemesis will be released and come after you. I'm not entirely sure what Nemesis is doing on Rockfort Island, but I digress. It's always fun playing with the light gun, but otherwise this is a pretty boring game with next to no depth to it. In 20th place, Resident Evil 3 Remake. Disappointingly linear remake of a complex game. When the Resident Evil 3 remake was announced, I was pretty excited. While I had my own issues with the RE2 remake, it was still a fantastic game and we were expecting something similar from RE3. Boy was everyone duped. In fact, rather than taking RE2 Remake's best qualities and building on them, it actually doubles down on its flaws, leaving us with this half-baked, rushed mess of a game. The original RE3 was great because it offered multiple scenarios throughout the game where your actions determined how the different portions of the game unfolded, meaning there was loads of replay value to see how taking a different course would change the story. This was almost entirely stripped away in favour of a linear narrative. Once you play the game, you'll also realise why the subtitle Nemesis was stripped from the title. In the original, he was ever present, constantly stalking Jill around the city and affecting how you explore. In the remake, he's basically consigned to a small part of the game and a few boss fights and scripted sequences. Compound all this with the fact that they dropped both the park and clock tower areas from the game, and you're left with what feels like an unfinished and rushed game with little to no replay value. It felt like the creators of this game hadn't even bothered to play the original. I'd suggest that any developer who's thinking of remaking a classic look at this game to see how not to do it. Just because you dress it up with modern controls and fancy graphics doesn't make it a good remake. You have to do justice to the original story and game mechanics, which Resident Evil 3 Remake doesn't even come close to doing. In 19th place, Resident Evil Revelations 2. A decent sequel, but doesn't do much to build on its predecessor. Revelations 2 is a good game. Like the first Revelations game, it very much falls into the middle of the pack when it comes to Resident Evil games. It doesn't do anything particularly new or special, but it does do justice to the formula established by RE4 and RE5. The story is really good. It's broken up into 4 episodes, each featuring 2 sets of characters. It marks the return of Claire Redfield to the franchise, and for the first time, Barry Burton as a playable character. It has some pretty campy dialogue, but that's no surprise for a Resident Evil game. It also has multiple endings, so there's a bit of replay value there. The game, like its predecessor, also offers raid mode, which gives you about 200 missions and 15 playable characters. It adds a lot more playability and can be a lot of fun. In 18th place, Resident Evil The Darkside Chronicles. Another decent sequel that doesn't do much to build on its predecessor. The Darkside Chronicles is the second of 2 on-rails first-person shooters that retell stories from some of the earlier Resident Evil games, while throwing in extra content and new bits of story. This one picks up the stories of Claire and Leon from Resident Evil 2, serving as something of a prequel to Resident Evil 4. Being that it's on rails, it offers very little in the ways of exploration or puzzle solving. However, as a light game, it's very fun. I say light gun, it was released for the Wii and PS3, so makes use of their respective motion controllers. I'd recommend using those and not a controller, because playing with the controller is arduous and not fun at all. The game mostly expands on the story of Leon Kennedy, but could be confusing if you've never played any of the other Resident Evil games. Overall, it's a good gun game, but that's all it really is. In 17th place, Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles, a fun on-rails shooter that expands on the Resident Evil lore. Realistically, you could pair this with the Darkside Chronicles, as they're basically just 2 sides of the same coin. The Umbrella Chronicles is an on-rails first-person shooter that retells the stories of Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil, and Resident Evil 3. It also throws an entirely new subplot into the mix, which shows the meddling and downfall of the Umbrella Corporation, narrated by the series' ultimate villain, Albert Wesker. The story does a really great job of streamlining the narrative of the original games, while adding in some deeper lore to explore as well. It's actually the best way to get a quick catch up on the series before taking on Resident Evil 5. The gameplay is similar to any gun game. You move automatically about the environments and you shoot things. It's actually really well done and manages to be scary at points. It's a great gun game and one of the more fun games on the Wii. It's certainly worth playing, especially if you're invested in learning more about the Resident Evil universe. In 16th place, Resident Evil Revelations. Has a good story and some scary moments, but doesn't do much to revitalise the franchise. Revelations was originally released on the Nintendo 3DS, so it was a pretty good accomplishment at the time. Much like its sequel, it falls in the middle of the pack of Resident Evil games. It manages to do justice to the formula introduced in Resident Evil 4 without doing much to innovate. However, the wheel doesn't always need to be reinvented, so Revelations ends up being a pretty good game. It follows Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield after the events of Resident Evil 4, as they try to prevent a bioterrorism organisation from releasing a virus into the world's oceans. The story is great, if a bit disjointed. Gameplay wise, it's similar to Resident Evil 4, but with a bit more tension and a bit scarier, hanging on survival elements a bit more. There's a distinct lack of enemy variety in the game, which is a bit of a bummer, but it doesn't stop the game from being a lot of fun. Also included is raid mode, which features loads of levels and playable characters. It really extends the playability beyond just the story mode. Overall, I'd recommend it as a solid entry to the series, even if it doesn't quite hit the heights of some of the greats. In 15th place, Resident Evil Outbreak File number 2. An okay game in retrospect, but ultimately lacks any innovation. Outbreak File number 2 takes place during the Raccoon City incident, where you work your way through multiple scenarios. You can choose between 8 different characters, each with their own unique items and abilities. You also have different difficulty levels which change the items and enemies that you'll encounter throughout. It controls very much like the previous entry in the franchise, making use of the usual tank controls with exploration and puzzle solving. When it was first released, it had online play, which was a great addition that was carried over from the first Outbreak game. It has a great gallery of monsters, including a bunch of infected animals that you encounter at the zoo. Overall, it's a good game with a lot of replayability, even now that the multiplayer servers have been deactivated. My main criticism is just that by the time this game came out, the usual formula had begun to get a bit stale. In fact, this was the last game before the release of the critically acclaimed Resident Evil 4, so I think the developers realised this before it was too late. In 14th place, Resident Evil Outbreak. A lack of innovation, but a great cast of characters makes this one a blast. Outbreak was the first Resident Evil game to feature multiplayer, though it wasn't available in Europe, so I never got a chance to try it. But how does it serve as a single player game? Like its sequel, by the time Outbreak was released, the usual formula had begun to get a bit stale. Despite this, the multiple scenarios, different characters and difficulty settings provide plenty to enjoy. Each character has their own unique abilities and story, so it's really worth replaying the game to see them all. It certainly doesn't do anything to innovate for the franchise, but put together with its sequel, you get a really fun look at how the Raccoon City incident unfolded for the average resident, which presents an interesting new perspective. In 13th place, Resident Evil Survivor. A fun little side story with some nice light gun action. Survivor was the first Resident Evil light gun game, and the first to deviate from the usual gameplay formula. At the time this was released, it was pretty exciting. We got to take on all the different monsters of Resident Evil using a light gun. It made a nice change and gave us a whole new side story to enjoy. What sets it apart from other light gun games of the day is that you can explore. Most light gun games up until then had been on rails or dealt in set pieces. With Resident Evil Survivor, much like other games in the series, you still had to explore and solve puzzles in order to advance. It's pretty short, so there's not a huge amount of replayability, but the story is engaging and the directions you take can actually change how the story unfolds, so it's worth playing a few times to see the different outcomes. It's far from being the best Resident Evil game, but it's still loads of fun and well worth playing, especially if you have an old PS1 light gun. In 12th place, Resident Evil 5. An action-packed climax to a 13-year story with lots of great moments. Once again, we take on the role of series hero Chris Redfield as he and his new partner Sheva Alomar investigate a bioterrorism threat deep in Western Africa. As the plot unfolds, we learn the fates of several of the series' recurring characters, including Chris's old enemy and commander, Albert Wesker. It plays much like Resident Evil 4 with the added bonus of having a partner with you who can be controlled either via the AI or by another person. This can be done in person or online using the multiplayer feature. It also leans more heavily into the action elements than its predecessor, very finely dancing the line between action and survival horror. The game features a ton of new and inventive monsters as well as lush, detailed environments. It's truly a stunning game with some great set pieces and boss fights. I had a blast with Resident Evil 5. Playing with a partner throughout the campaign was so much fun, it adds a whole new depth to the gameplay. The story is fantastic and exactly what you'd want from a Resident Evil game, and it all culminates with the most epic battle on top of a roaring volcano. It's just the right mix of horror and campiness that makes the Resident Evil franchise brilliant. In 11th place, Resident Evil Village. A thrilling and creepy monster fest filled with larger-than-life characters. Resident Evil Village picks up after the events of Resident Evil Biohazard, where Ethan Winters and his wife are now raising their baby somewhere in Europe. Ethan is kidnapped and eventually finds himself in a creepy village filled with all sorts of monsters and crazy characters. The game takes place in first person, just like its predecessor, but mixes in elements of earlier games like the attaché case inventory from Resident Evil 4. It's also a fairly open world. You're required to explore the village and unlock new areas in order to advance, picking up new weapons and encountering all manner of wacky monsters along the way. The story is great, with everything revolving around the evil Miranda and her various stooges, while Ethan tries to rescue his daughter and his wife. The characters you encounter are varied and intriguing, with each one's domain requiring a different way of playing. Sometimes you need to go full force guns blazing, while others you need to sneak your way around. It offers variety, so it's easy to forgive the game's flaws such as the easy puzzles. While it marks a bit of a departure from the survival elements of its predecessor, it still manages to be scary and engaging. It's a perfect sequel and a great addition to the franchise that was revitalised by Resident Evil Biohazard. In 10th place, Resident Evil Code Veronica, filled to the brim with challenging puzzles, fights and frights. Code Veronica debuted on the Dreamcast to critical acclaim, and it's easy to see why. The story sees you take on the role of Claire Redfield as she tries to escape Rockfort Island after a biohazard outbreak. Later, in his quest to find and rescue his sister, you take on the role of Chris Redfield too. It's classic Resident Evil, tank controls, unique monsters and campy dialogue. The story does a lot to develop some of the series' recurring characters as well as introducing a few new and interesting ones. It's probably twice as long as any Resident Evil game that's come before it too, and is chock full of puzzles to solve. Thanks to the upgraded hardware from previous games, all the backgrounds are now fully 3D rather than being pre-rendered, and more enemies can appear on screen, allowing some more frantic encounters. The original version is considered one of the best games on the Dreamcast, but the best way to play it is on PS2 with the upgraded Code Veronica X. It offers some new cutscenes which help to elevate the story. It's one of the best survival horror games ever made, and I'd still recommend it to this day. In 9th place, Resident Evil Zero. Atmospheric and creepy with a great story that sets the stage for the original game. Zero takes place before the events of the original game. You take on the dual roles of STARS rookie Rebecca Chambers and prisoner Billy Cohen as they explore an abandoned Umbrella training facility that's been taken over by the T-Virus. On their way, they unravel a few mysteries about the founding of Umbrella, and it all leads directly into the first Resident Evil game. It follows the established Resident Evil formula with a couple of new mechanics. You control both characters, switching between them at will to solve puzzles and fight enemies. The game also drops the magic chests that were common in Resident Evil up until now, in favour of being able to leave your items wherever you drop them. This adds a new layer of strategy to the problem solving, which is a welcome addition to the series. Few Resident Evil games manage to create a creepy atmosphere as well as this one. The game is packed with tension and scares, and the story is really engaging. My only gripe is that after all of this, it's a bit weird how useless Rebecca is in the first Resident Evil. That small bump aside, it's an amazing game that shakes up the formula just enough to keep it fun. In 8th place, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Try to survive while the terrifying Nemesis chases you all over the city. Classic survival horror. Jill Valentine makes her return in this one, which takes place both before and after the events of Resident Evil 2, without really intersecting. Jill is trying to escape the city, however she's got a terrifying stalker tracking her down. The Nemesis haunts her every step, chasing and attacking with fists, tentacles and even a rocket launcher. Along the way she also encounters members of the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasures Service, one of whom she forms a close bond with. Resident Evil 3 is a brilliant game. It doesn't really change the game mechanics much, but that's okay. The brilliance of RE3 is how varied the environments are and how scary it is. Once Nemesis is introduced, he becomes a constant nuisance. You never know when he's going to show up, and this is compounded by the fact that the game offers you choices that affect how the different situations will play out, which in turn affects at what points he'll appear. This all culminates in a showdown in a factory, which could play out several different endings depending on the choices you've made throughout. All of the best bits were basically stripped away for the modern remake, which is why it's so reviled by fans of the series. If you want the true Resident Evil 3 experience, you've got to play Nemesis. It's tense, it's spooky, and it's full of puzzles. In 7th place, Resident Evil 4 Remake. A fantastic remake that streamlines the story and drops some of the silliness. Resident Evil 4 was, without a doubt, one of the greatest games of its generation, so remaking it and trying to improve on the experience was always going to be difficult. Thankfully, the RE4 remake does a great job. The biggest improvement, of course, is in the graphics. Most of the characters and environments are the same as the original, but they've been rebuilt with modern graphics. This gives the game more detail, and the new engine provides better performance than the original game. Some parts of the original game were either modified or removed altogether. The controls and mechanics are better tuned to modern standards, and the battle with Krauser towards the end of the game is improved with the removal of QuickTime events, which are replaced by an actual knife fight. The escort missions with Ashley are also improved by having much less frustrating AI. It's not all improvements though, in my opinion. The removal of the laser corridor section is a cardinal sin. The tone of the game in general is geared more towards serious as opposed to the original, which had a slight campiness to it. The campy nature combined with the horror is what makes Resident Evil special, and toning down the campiness was a bad move in my books. All that being said, it's an incredible remake. It's probably the closest thing to a perfect remake we realistically could have asked for. It modernised the game and opened it up to a whole new audience, without removing the essence of what made the game great to begin with. If you've played it and loved it, I'd recommend trying out the original to see the differences. In 6th place, Resident Evil 2 Remake. An incredible remake in almost every way, but squanders some of its potential. As one of the best games of the PS1 era, Resident Evil 2 was desperately in need of a remake. The original Resident Evil got a remake only 6 years after its release, so it's surprising they waited 21 years to remake the superior sequel. The RE2 remake is basically a whole new game. The narrative has been rewritten, taking into account certain retcons that have happened in some of the sequels, but staying true to the original story. Like all of the modern remakes, the graphics are amazing. The Raccoon City police station has never looked better. Making use of the new engine allows for the kind of tense and spooky atmosphere that you could never achieve back in the PS1 days. The biggest improvement to the original though is the terrifying stalker, Mr. X. In the original, he only really turned up in certain rooms and during certain set pieces. Now, however, he stalks you from room to room, slowly, looking around, searching for you. You can hide, but not for long. If you do happen to make your way to a safe place, you can hear him patrolling the corridors. It genuinely feels like you could bump into him at any time, and once he makes eye contact, he'll rush you and go for the kill. The experience is so scary and it's by far the best part of the game. I do have some gripes with this game though that really bring it down in my estimation. The original game had 4 separate scenarios, each with their own ending and unique puzzles and bosses. This game really only has 2 scenarios. Leon and Claire each have their own narrative, as they should, however despite there being A and B scenarios for each of them like in the original, there really is no difference between them, barring the character's starting point. For example, if you play as Claire, you always face William Birkin as your big boss regardless of which scenario it is. In the original it mixed it up so that each character got to face all the bosses. I think this was an attempt to create a clearer canon, but it just reeks of laziness on behalf of the developers. It makes playing through all 4 scenarios a bit redundant, as you really only need to play a single A and B to see everything. There's also some stuff that was cut that I'd rather have been expanded, like the factory. I still think, as its own game, the RE2 remake is incredible. Even if you only play the 2 scenarios, they're so much fun to play. For me, this game would have been ranked as the best ever Resident Evil if they'd only made the effort to create the 4 distinct scenarios, but because they didn't, it feels like a missed opportunity and the remake feels somewhat incomplete. A familiar feeling. In 5th place, Resident Evil Biohazard revitalised the franchise by returning to its survival horror roots. Resident Evil 6 felt like the end for the franchise. Fans were split over the game's change towards action and away from horror, and I very much fell into the side that hated it. I was convinced that I'd never play another new Resident Evil game again. Then came along a demo for the new Resident Evil Biohazard, and I was blown away. The game finally takes the franchise back to its roots of pure survival horror. It makes a switch from third-person view to a first-person view, which helps to bring the player into the game and make it feel like they're really there. It drops the reliance on regular, well-known characters and introduces a new protagonist, Ethan Winters, who is drawn to a plantation in Louisiana in the search for his wife Mia, who's been missing for 3 years. What unfolds is a haunting, terrifying and ultimately sad story about an infected family mutated by their infection and at the mercy of their worst impulses. As Ethan, you work your way around the plantation, encountering each member of the sinister Baker family, desperately trying to find your wife so you can both escape. Weapons and ammo are sparse, building the tension, and the place is full of puzzles to solve and horrors to uncover. Biohazard completely revitalised the franchise and reinvigorated my love for it. It had real scares and the survival aspects were paramount. I'm so glad I gave it a go, and if you want a truly terrifying experience, you should try playing it in VR. It elevates it to an insane level. In 4th place, Resident Evil Remake. Experience the original horror in a new and even more terrifying way. The Resident Evil remake came just 6 years after the release of the original. It doesn't really feel like it nowadays, but back then, 6 years for gaming was a long time. The leap in graphics and performance from the PS1 to the GameCube was huge, and this allowed them to recreate Resident Evil in the way it was originally intended. And in all honesty, if the original game had been as scary as this one, I might have never played another horror game as long as I lived. The remake takes the original game and elevates it in every way. It has better graphics, scarier environments, more dangerous monsters, and an expanded narrative that features a bunch of great stuff that had to be dropped from the original. The puzzles have been redefined and expanded, and the Spencer Mansion is larger and creepier than ever. My favourite addition are the Crimson Heads. Basically, every time you kill a zombie, there's a chance that they'll come back to life with increased speed and strength and the ability to open doors. You can burn the bodies, but you only have so much lighter fuel, so you have to choose which ones to burn wisely. If I was to criticise anything, it would be that the game is too scary. It's not often I come to replay it, simply because I don't think my heart can take it. Of course, some people absolutely live for this kind of experience, and Resident Evil Remake is top of the table. I can't recommend this enough to anyone looking for a pure survival experience. It's incredible. In third place, Resident Evil. Iconic and corny dialogue mixed with pure survival horror, the start of the definitive horror franchise. Resident Evil was released in 1996, inspired by the limitations of its creator's previous game, Sweet Home. It combined action, exploration, puzzle solving and inventory management while introducing several new mechanics, like vitals monitoring instead of a health bar, and limiting the number of saves. All of this together seems a given nowadays, but that's because of the standards set by this game. It takes place in the Arklay Mountains outside of Raccoon City. The STARS team is sent there to investigate a string of brutal murders, but are quickly ambushed and forced to retreat to a creepy mansion. You take on the role of Jill Valentine or Chris Redfield as they investigate the mansion, unravelling a huge conspiracy while simultaneously trying to overcome the horrors that lie in wait throughout. So much of what makes the series iconic was established in this game, including the campiness, although there's a good chance this wasn't entirely on purpose. The dialogue is corny, probably due to mistranslation, and the acting isn't brilliant, but some of the line deliveries have become so iconic they've entered the zeitgeist. Resident Evil practically defined the survival horror genre, inspiring loads of copycats and returning zombies to pop culture, driving a huge revival of interest in zombie films in the early 2000s. The series has continued to thrive, and almost 30 years later, it's still going with new games, films, TV shows, comic books, and more. And while the Resident Evil Remake is probably a better game, there's something so special about the first one that you can't fail to ignore its importance. In second place, Resident Evil 4. Revolutionised the series, bringing bigger action, bigger scares, and a brilliant story. RE4 was originally released on the GameCube, a kick in the teeth to all the players who've been playing Resident Evil on PlayStation since the first one. Luckily, it was only 9 months later that it was released on PlayStation 2, so we didn't have to wait long. Resident Evil 4 takes place in a rural village in Spain. One of the heroes of Resident Evil 2, Leon Kennedy, returns to the franchise, having been sent here to search for the President's daughter Ashley, who has been kidnapped. He quickly discovers the cult of Los Illuminados and its followers, who have all been infected by a mind-controlling parasite, the Las Plagas. You take control of Leon as you try to find the President's daughter, escape the village, and confront your past. This was the first Resident Evil game to significantly shake up the gameplay. The basis of shooting enemies and exploring is still there, but now you control Leon via a third-person view. When shooting, you can aim the weapon, giving you free rein to aim at weak points or stuff in the environment. Fixed camera angles are gone now too, allowing for better freedom of movement and bigger environments. The game also swerves into a more action-oriented style as opposed to survival horror. It's still scary, but in a more of a frantic way than a creepy way. There tends to be more ammo and the healing items compared to previous games in the series, but they're not infinite. Some modicum of inventory management and ammo conservation is required. The improvements in overall story are huge too, with a fully realised narrative that plays out at a good pace. The voice acting is much better than previous entries, having hired much more professional actors this time around. It means you don't end up with any of those accidentally hilarious and campy line deliveries like you got before. Instead, any of the campiness that's in the game, and there's definitely a decent amount, is purposeful and genuine. Where future entries tended to take it too far the wrong way, this game perfectly blends action with survival horror. It has a few frustrations, largely the quick time events which were common in games at the time, but what game doesn't? The remake was fantastic, but it toned down some of the campiness and cut a few things. Frankly, the original is much more fun, and its impact on the genre has been huge. If you're a younger gamer who doesn't quite get on with the classic games that old gits like me play, then I can't recommend Resident Evil 4 more as your first step into the franchise. It's full of scares, heart-pumping action, and exciting characters. It truly fits the bill as a horror gaming masterpiece. And the best game in the Resident Evil franchise in first place is Resident Evil 2, the ultimate survival horror with scares aplenty, unrivaled tension and iconic characters. Anticipation for the sequel to 1996's Resident Evil was huge. The original game was even reissued as a director's cut version that came with a demo of Resident Evil 2, building that anticipation even further. So big was the hype, the developers wanted to make sure that the game they put out was perfect, so much so that they actually scrapped a version of it that was 2/3 complete because it didn't meet the director's standards. This version has since been rebuilt by modders and can be found online. When Resident Evil 2 did finally release in 1998, we were not disappointed. Resident Evil 2 takes place a few months after the events of the first game. You take on the role of one of two characters that would become icons of the franchise, Claire Redfield or Leon Kennedy. Claire has come to Raccoon City in search of her brother, Chris from the first game, and Leon has arrived in the city for his first day as an RCPD police officer. All goes awry very quickly as they discover the city has been taken over by zombies, human beings infected with the T-virus. They make their way to the police station where they uncover a conspiracy orchestrated by Raccoon City's police chief Brian Irons and the mysterious Umbrella Corporation, facing many horrors along the way. The controls remain largely the same as the first game, with tank-like controls and fixed camera angles. Inventory management is back, as well as monitoring your vitals, with the added feature that your character starts to move more lethargically the more injured they are, to give you a visual cue. Almost everything is improved upon compared to the first game. The pre-rendered backgrounds are much more detailed. Combine that with the more detailed character models and the immersion is a lot better. You also get a larger selection of weapons to choose from, some of which are upgradable. One of the biggest improvements though is the music. The sound design in general is incredible, with the music coming in at the perfect moments to build the tension and the perfect sound effects for every action. There is one major thing about Resident Evil 2 that makes it stand out though. You get to play as two distinct characters, each with their own story where they meet their own unique survivors and explore their own unique areas. This isn't an entirely new idea. What is though is that each character actually has a second story too. Should you complete the game with Claire first, you'll then unlock a B scenario for Leon. This represents what Leon was doing while you were completing the game as Claire. In it you face separate unique bosses, an extended ending and the threat of being stalked by the towering Mr. X throughout the police station. The reverse is also true, meaning there are 4 wholly unique scenarios to play through, giving you loads of replayability. You can even unlock the Hunk and Tofu modes, and in certain versions the Extreme Battle mode. The voice acting is better than the original, but it's still not amazing. It gives it that campy charm that Resident Evil is well known for. It's most Resident Evil fan my age's favourite for a reason. It took what the original game did so well and perfected it with better graphics, better music, and frankly, better characters. Leon Kennedy has become the poster boy for the franchise, and the monstrous William Birkin, the game's primary antagonist, is one of the most unique enemies to come out of the franchise. Had the remake done justice to the 4 different scenarios, we'd be talking about that for number 1. But the otherwise great remake we got simply wouldn't exist without this game coming first. In fact, the whole franchise owes Resident Evil 2 for solidifying it as the number 1 horror franchise in gaming. For that, and for so many other reasons, Resident Evil 2 is the best game in the Resident Evil series and one of the greatest and most important games of all time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. You can also check out my ranking of the Pokemon and Metal Gear Solid franchises by following the cards on your screen. Or head on over to my channel for loads more gaming content. Thanks again and have a great day.